Hello and welcome to India's World. Indian firms are investing in a big way in farmland in Africa. But they are not the only ones. Firms from China, Saudi Arabia, Malaysia and various other countries are making a rush to Africa to buy up farmland. This is being described as land grab or the second scramble for Africa. It is also being described as a new form of colonialism. To discuss this issue with me, to answer the question whether Indian firms are really grabbing land and whether India stands in danger of being described as a new colonial power in Africa along with other countries, I have with me a distinguished panel of experts. I have with me Ambassador Vivek Katju, a formidable diplomat who has in various capacities looked after Africa in the Foreign Office. I have Anuradha Mittal, Executive Director of the Oakland Institute, a think tank in California. You and your colleagues have done a lot of empirical research on so-called land grab in Africa. And I have with me Obang, of the Executive Director of the Movement for New Ethiopia, Solidarity Movement for New Ethiopia.
Yes.
So welcome all of you to the show.
Thank you.
Anuradha, let me begin with you. Give us some idea of this rush for land in Africa. Indian companies, I'm told, have bought up 600,000 hectares of land in the last 3 years. But who else is buying this land, and which are the countries where this land is being bought?
Well, sure. First of all, if we talk about Africa, and some people tend to think it's only Ethiopia or Tanzania, the entire continent is of interest to the foreign investors. And according to the research that we have done, which is verified by the World Bank findings as well, is that in 2009 alone, nearly 56 million hectares of land, that's the size of France, has been bought and leased by foreign investors in this world, with 75% of that being in Africa.
But why are they buying up this land?
You know, that's a very good question. What is the sudden rush for land? And there are two factors that we find. One is the 2007-2008 food price crisis, where you find there's a lot of interest and you see the agricultural fundamentals that we need more land to be able to feed the world. The second thing that does not get talked about as much is the financial crisis. In the absence of the housing market and other factors, you know, you have pension funds, you have private equity funds, hedge funds who are looking for the next soft commodity to invest in. So you mentioned China, India, Malaysia, but in our research we have found private equity hedge funds out of United States or European countries also rushing to places such as African nations to invest in their farmland.
Okay, Obang, why is this being described as land grab? Grabbing implies violation of rights. What kind of rights are being violated? After all, your governments in Africa are inviting investors to buy land. So why call it land grab?
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think that, you know, that terminology where it comes from, and you elaborated very well. When you call something land grab, means that you take something that doesn't belong to you. The reason why I think most of the people, even for me, I could actually usually try to say it is actually more than that. I call it a life grab. Because
life grab.
Life, yeah. You're grabbing the life, yeah. You're taking away the life that which most of these people survive on. If you look at it in Africa, majority of the peoples live on the land, subsistent farmers. They don't own tractors. They use the little hoes to, and the land is what they've been living on for long. But now you have a mega farm coming to lease the land, almost, 200,000 acres of land. The people who are living there are not consulted. They have never been compensated. Most of the case, the agreements is being done by the ruling government as well as the company. So you leave the local indigenous people out. And so when people say land grab is, now we have a group of people who will not now live the way they used to live, or they may not even find the food. So that's why when we call it a land grab is, they're taking away the land from the indigenous peoples, and then without consulting them, and there's no, even one of the biggest problems usually is transparency and accountability is non-exist.
Okay, no transparency, no accountability.
Yes.
Vivek, now, rightly or wrongly, if the African people see this as new form of colonialism, what implications does it have for Indian diplomacy? I mean, can a country which was a beacon of hope for Africa, which was at the forefront of anti-colonial struggle, afford to be seen in this light?
I think projecting India as a kind of a neo-colonial power is doing us very little justice. India's record in Africa doesn't have to be repeated here. We've supported the liberation struggles for Africa. I think our positive role is recognized all through Africa. Now, in this particular issue, in the light of what our friend from Africa, from Ethiopia, has said, it is essentially an intra-African issue. It is an issue which has to be focused upon and resolved by the African peoples of different countries and their governments. Foreign players, foreign companies, including Indian companies, are outside of this process. After all, we who live in the real world, in the world of interstate relations, know full well that foreign companies or foreign governments do business with other governments, with legally constituted authorities. And in this case too, as you so well put it initially, if the companies, and Indian companies, we would like, are following local laws, are not breaking any rules or regulations while acquiring or leasing land, then surely that can't be called land grab.
Okay. Anuradha, do you want to say something on this?
Sure, I would, because I think since we talked about legal, I mean, I think there are two ways to look at it. You know, because what is legal? I mean, we all know we lived in an era that we have seen apartheid. Apartheid was legal. You know, I live in the country like US where segregation was once legal.
Yeah,
so that's one definition of legal. But the other one is if you start talking about legal and international human rights standards. And so you have a situation in Ethiopia, for instance, where on one hand you have the absence of consultations, free prior informed consent, which is a universally accepted human right enshrined in international law. And it is on one hand the responsibility of the Ethiopian government, but you also have, you know, home investor states, for instance, India or Malaysia or other countries that are investing. There are emerging standards that you cannot...
We'll come back to it.
So we do become responsible, basically.
Absolutely. Point well taken. We need to take a break at this juncture. We'll come back with this discussion. Don't go away. Welcome back. We are discussing the rush of foreign companies to Africa to buy farmland for commercial farming. And rather, you were talking about how there's lack of transparency, etc. But the question I want to ask you is that one of the arguments given for large-scale farming in Africa is that it will provide food security, that is South-South cooperation, that's a win-win situation, that these companies will come, produce food which will be consumed by the local population. What's wrong with that?
Well, I can only respond to it in terms of our research. We have looked at over 100 land deals in over 8 different African countries. And it's very interesting, in most of the cases that we found, in terms of food security, a lot of these land deals are actually for production of agrofuels, biofuels, that have nothing about feeding people. You're talking about palm oil plantations. Or when you are growing food, you're actually growing it for export. So we have looked at the contracts where they clearly say in case of, you're provided investment protection agreements, which allow you, in the case of, say, Zambia, that you can actually export, even when there's food shortages, 80% of the food that is being grown and stored in the country. So this whole element of it will improve food security is a myth. And when we start looking at the facts as we did, we find no evidence that would bear truth to it.
No, I think, look, it's grossly unfair to compare the present governments in Africa with the apartheid regime. That regime was an illegal regime. Everyone knows it. Let's not go so far.
Well, I think till we were able to declare it to be illegal, it was very legal.
No. India never...
We are going into a different discussion.
No, I think it needs to be addressed because...
You've addressed it, Vivek.
No, I'm sorry. India never recognized that. So for us, it was never a legal government. But to say that, for example, the government of Prime Minister Millet, the late Prime Minister Millet, who did so much for his country, there may be different perspectives on his views on democracy and democratic rights. But in terms of development, to compare it with the apartheid regime is unfair. Now,
No, but I would say that...
I want to let Obang speak. Obang, you have a lot of unused land in your country. Why shouldn't this land be put to good use if your government decides to put it to good use by growing palm oil there or jatropha for fuel oil? What's wrong with it?
So I think one thing that I want to be straightforward, clear to people is we are not anti-development. We are not also anti-investment. What we are against is we are against what I call a daylight robbery. And I can emphasize with what Ambassador says. In Ethiopia, when the Prime Minister Mallas is in power, even until he died. Let me make this clear. In Ethiopia today, there's no any freedom of expression at all in the countries. In Ethiopia, we have 547 parliament members. Only one is the opposition. And the Prime Minister of Mallas, as you said it, he tried to hang on in power by dividing people according to the ethnicity.
No, we are going off track.
I'm coming to that because Ambassador was saying that.
But I don't want to go in that direction. Okay. We are discussing purchase of farmland there.
Okay, so with that in mind...
Is there unused land in your country?
Oh, yeah. You know, when they talk about unused land, there's no, to this day, there's no any place where there's no undiscovered land. Every land, there's people who live into that place. What we are hearing right now, one of the things that the point that really is not coming clear to the peoples, as I say that the investment is good for the people of Ethiopia, but to say that the multi or mega companies coming to help grow food to Ethiopia, for the Ethiopian, I think every Ethiopian will love that. But in most of the cases, even right now, there's some in Ethiopia where they grow teff outside Addis. This is the place where they used to grow the best teff.
Teff is used for
injera. Yeah. And some of the company came, which is Katju, even one of them, the Indian company, they use that farm to grow flowers. And people who used to depend on these, now they cannot even feed their family, but the land they have is being used for flower. And that when we say that this idea of a mega farm coming will give food security to African is totally wrong.
Okay, now Vivek, my question to you is that in whatever Obang said, you know, the undercurrent is whatever Karturi Global is doing, etc., that they're confusing Indian companies with government of India. These companies don't fly the flag of India. They fly the flag of international capitalism. So why blame India? India did not discover capitalism.
No, I think you make a very fair point. But I'd go one step further. As I said, these are basic issues regarding models of development. Each country has to decide on its model of development.
The question is also, how does it decide?
No, you are right. That is an internal process to each country. Now, if a government is recognized by the United Nations, it's not a rogue government. And if that government decides on a certain set of policies and invites foreign investors, you take Karturi, invites Karturi, and Karturi then acquires land in a legal manner, lawful manner, and develops floriculture and brings in foreign exchange. Yeah. I'm not holding a brief for Karturi or any company. All that I'm emphasizing is that you can't hold this Karturi responsible.
But let me take this argument to Anuradha. Anuradha, what happens when there's a democracy deficit in that country? Can we take the UN argument as the clinching argument and say, look, we don't care what kind of democracy they have. Whether they consult their people, they don't consult their people, it's none of our business.
Exactly. So I think the question, and I'm going to go because I work at a policy think tank and just state the facts. You have a country where you don't have freedom of expression. Before the last elections, because it's called a democracy, because at elections, more than 30,000 opposition people were put in jail, where most of the journalists are in jail.
No, but businessmen don't look at democracy.
No, exactly.
They look at the laws of the land.
I'm talking about the government. So we say because this government is still recognized by the United Nations, because it's an ally of the Western governments, so we are going to just recognize them. In case of apartheid, and I will bring them back, it took a lot of civil society pressure and divestment campaigns before countries said there's a problem here. So, you know, those battles have never been won easily. But I think in terms of it's true, Karturi and others don't fly the national flag. But what we're also talking about is, you know, Indian government is open-heartedly declaring that we will be developing, for instance, a sugar industry in Ethiopia, the line of credit that is provided, with conditionalities that 75% of it has to be paid back by, employing services through India.
Which is what the West has been doing for a long time.
And I think that's the point, because you started this conversation by saying where India was by not recognizing a government that we declared illegal, which practiced apartheid. So the shift of pattern where we are following the West, and that is the new colonization colonizer that we have become, that instead of that morality, we have chosen to go down.
No, we have just 1 minute. Obang, I want to ask you, what are Indian companies doing wrong? If your government does not have a proper consultative process for acquiring land, why blame the companies?
This is one of the things that I want to just.
You have to tell me quickly,
yes,
please.
Okay, one point which we mentioned before, say that these companies, they carry the capitalism flag, but not the Indian. I would say that's wrong, because according to the people who are being displaced, they say that it is the Indian company that displaced them. So the Indian name is there. So that's one thing that I want to clear.
Okay,
so now I want to the point that you are saying that. One thing that it come back to our conscience, that the consciousness, that what makes us to be human is our moral conscience, obligation. If we want to invest in some country, would we want it to make sure that their relationship is the morally right? People, the dignity of those people are respected?
Point well taken. We need to take a break at this juncture. We'll come back to this very interesting discussion to Vivek, Katju, who wanted to say something. Don't go away. Welcome back. We are discussing the controversial role of Indian corporates in commercial farming in Africa. Vivek, you were agitated about something and wanted to say something.
I'm not agitated, but I think I'd like to set the record straight. The Indian assistance program in Africa has been always responsive to African needs. It's not something that we've thrust down the throats of Africa.
These commercial ventures are not part of that.
No. Yeah. I think I'm responding to the point made about the line of credit to the sugar industry. We have decided to extend a large amount of money, I think $640 million in all, for the establishment of the sugar industry in Africa, in Ethiopia. This was in response to repeated requests from the government of Ethiopia, which told us that it was necessary as part of the development plans to develop this industry.
Fine, but that logic has been rejected by some of the people here.
No, well, you do due diligence.
No.
I mean, when you invest, you do due diligence what the social, environmental, economic impact would be. So what I'm hearing is that the Indian government would do it without doing the assessment.
No, it is for the government. I would reject the argument that it is for a foreign government to be intrusive in making these assessments about another country. It is just as in India. I would never like the United States.
As an investor.
Okay, we'll leave it there. No, that's a point of view. That's a point of view. It's a valid point of view. You may reject it. My question to you is, what do you expect? What kind of moral and ethical behavior do you expect from foreign investors buying land in Africa? Because, that's what you're constantly hinting at. What specifically would you like them to do?
Well, as an investor, if I'm going to go and put my money, I do due diligence. I want to make sure this is a safe, secure, good investment. And that includes that is going to have any adverse impact, which can come back to bite me. Yeah. So if I'm going to be putting money down to develop sugar industry, say in Lower Omo in Ethiopia, I want to know where the sugar plantations would come. What would be the impact on River Omo? What would be the impact on the, the site which is declared as a UNESCO, heritage site? You have the different tribes, Bodis, Mursis, Suris who live there. What will the impact be on their livelihoods? So as an investor, forget about morality and ethics. I would want to know what the impact of my investment is. Can I actually expect the returns? The returns are just in money, or it might result in conflict, or it might result in investments being destroyed because the people are upset about the devastation of their lives.
Okay, Vivek.
I think this is being very intrusive in the matters relating to sovereign rights of other countries.
Yeah, but I'm asking you, how should the accountability of Indian firms be judged? Should they be accountable to Indian law? Should they be accountable to African law, the country they're operating in? Should they limit themselves merely to the contract which they sign? Because often these contracts are apparently one para or one page contracts.
They have to be fully accountable to the laws of the country where they are operating. That goes without question.
But should they not see in the long term what would happen? Because if that government doesn't survive, what happens to your investment?
Second, they have to be accountable to Indian laws. They also need to protect their investments, and therefore they need to take prudent commercial decisions. Now, if they adhere to all this, surely you can't expect Indian companies to go into issues which are within the sovereign domestic domain of a foreign country. That, I am afraid, is something that we in India have rejected always.
Fair enough, fair enough. Obang, you've often said that if you see somebody robbing the blind, it's your duty to stop that robbery. What did you mean by that? And you've always said that, I want to ask Indians that what would Mahatma Gandhi have said about India dealing with cronies in Africa? What did you mean?
And what I mean is that, and it's also the same to the ambassadors here, what the Indian company are doing in Ethiopia, if it is displacing the local peoples, if it is wrong, would those companies be allowed to do what they are doing in that country? This is one of the things that, in one big picture we keep missing. These companies are investing in a regime that really don't put the interests of their peoples. In regimes that really...
But he's rejecting that. He's saying it's not for us to intervene in your political...
If that's not the case then, that's, if you're saying that, in other words, your point is very, you are saying that if we have a regime that torture their people, kill their people, and you want to invest, that's their business. Let them that.
I think now you are... Yes, you are
because we are running out of time.
You are entering into a domain
I think it's a
which is
domain.
normally not within the domain of international law. I think, let's be very clear, I don't personally believe in all these notions of the right to protect. I believe in sovereignty, because I think once you violate sovereignty, you enter into very dangerous territory. But more importantly, in India, we never allowed a foreign power to tell us what our development strategy should be.
But we also threw out companies. But anyway,
but that was part of our development strategy. So if other countries, as part of their development strategies, decide to nationalize, we have investment guarantees.
Yeah.
But it is their sovereign decision, and I respect those sovereign decisions.
Anuradha, I'll come back to you. Anuradha, what we are sort of going around is that can there be some best practices to follow? How should Indian companies operate in Africa so that India doesn't get a bad name? So what are the best practices that you would recommend?
Well, first of all, I think we have to find the places which have rule of law. So if you're talking about countries where there's the absence of rule of law, you actually want to stay away. Forget about morality, as I said. Even as an investor, you say, that's not a place where I want to go in for long term. But I think, secondly, we have to really talk about why is this land rush going into Africa. If you're finding land where you're paying very little, you're getting complete water rights, where you don't have to pay import duties, where we don't have to, there's a whole set of things. And it's all about transparency, accountability, and consultations.
Okay, wrap up quickly. Half a minute.
I think if one stretches this argument, then I do not understand why fingers are being pointed at Indian companies. By this logic, no investment should take place in such countries.
Okay.
And therefore, they should be totally subjected to a primitive way of life.
All right, Obang, can you sum up? What do you think needs to be done?
What needs to be done, as as he said it, and as you said earlier, what Gandhi, did for this country. It was, the British was here, the minority domination by colonizing their people. They want to free their peoples, and that was the motto. The one thing that really unique about this country, the contribution that the son of this land done to the whole world was that when something is wrong, stand up for it. So in this case, if there's a regime that really suppresses their people, investing in that, you are contributing to that things. So in the logic here that what we are talking about in this case, we are not saying that leave Africa the way it is, but we are saying that if you want to invest in this country, make sure that these are a country that will respect and value their people, because if it is not, it's going to come and bite them. Okay. I want to end it by saying that, keeping in mind, these companies who go to these regimes are not going to last forever. Something will happen, and when this is happening, this kind of investment is very risky, and the people will go on the top of the very reason what I say that now there's some violence happening, where some of the people will go.
Let's hope this violence doesn't happen. Yes, there's a warning here for investors in Africa. I thank you all for sharing your views with our viewers and telling us about what's happening in Africa. I hope we'll see you again in our studios. That's all we have for you today. We'll be back again next week with another issue. Till then, goodbye.